Great, thank you. So good afternoon, everyone. We'll call the meeting of the Race, Equity, and Inclusion Working Group to order, It's Monday, August 10th. So if we could do a roll call, please, that would be great.
Yes, thank you. And just as a reminder, today's meeting is being recorded. Director is Cabaldon.
Here.
Frost. Absent. Gallardo. Absent. Harris.
Here.
Joyner. Absent. Jennings.
Mr. Jennings is on his way. I'm just logging on for a second till he gets there. He's
okay.
Just stuck on something. I just wanted to let you guys know.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Lozano. Absent. Zaragoza.
Here.
Saylor.
Here.
Tucker. Ex officio member Tucker.
I'm here, thank you.
Thank you. And then co-chair Samayoa.
Here.
And co-chair Frerichs.
Here.
Thank you.
You missed me, but I'm here.
Oh, I'm sorry. Shanier here, calling for the roll. I apologize. Thank you.
No worries. I doubt myself sometimes.
We appreciate you being here, Jay. So moving along, we will first have we want to open up the item for public communications. Any person wishing to address the group on an item not listed on the agenda, maybe do so at this time. Checking in with Renee to see if there are any members of the public wishing to provide public communications.
Currently, there are no members wishing to make a public comment.
Great, thank you. Appreciate that. Then moving on to item 1 for the day, an action item on the Race, Equity, and Inclusion Working Group charge. We have a presentation obviously from staff. We have a bunch of information in our packets, and also just want to make sure that we would love to be able to get a chance after this discussion to try to take a vote on the draft charge, while we have a quorum. And so whoever wants to kick off, if it's Jennifer or James or however you want to proceed.
Yep, it's me. Sorry about that. My audio cut out for a second. Good afternoon, Jennifer Hargrove, your SACOG staff. Before you start your discussion today, I just wanted to highlight a few of the things from the staff report for this item. First, it was noted in the staff report that SACOG is hiring a consultant to help us with this work and create a framework that we can move forward with. Since staff are not experts, this consultant can help us understand how our work programs can better reflect equity and inclusion and build a roadmap for anti-racism in our work. The action plan that they'll be creating will come to this group for discussion, and this group's discussions will also influence their work. So there'll be that relationship back and forth as they create an action plan for the agency. Details of the consultant contract are still being finalized, so I don't have a lot more information to share on that today, but we do hope to introduce you to the consultant and their work at your next working group meeting on August 31st. The second piece of the staff report I want to highlight is your focus for the discussion today, and that really is honing in on the work ahead. Per SACOG rules, every board committee should have a charge, and attachment A is a draft charge for this committee's consideration. This would be adopted by the full board at their August 20th meeting, should the committee move it forward today. This first item is scheduled for just over an hour, just over half of the meeting today. And we did that because while the charge is intended to be more broad and flexible and probably doesn't need an hour-long discussion, this is a new working group, and so we wanted to give the time and the space for it, and we would like to also understand where this group would like to focus so that staff can better prepare for the months ahead. We have gotten some valuable input to date. We've heard the working group would like to be action-oriented, focus on meaningful impact, and really stick with our strengths and what we know within our SACOG work. But we would like to better understand if there are specific areas or questions or topics that the working group wants to focus in on. The staff report does outline 4 broader topic areas with some questions and ideas for exploration. The 4 topic areas you'll see in your staff report are using data and analysis to support advancing racial justice, equity, and inclusion, integrating equity into SACOG's work, integrating equity into SACOG's operations, and how or should we support local agency work. They can, overlap with each other, and it's not an exhaustive list. Again, with your time today, we're hoping you can have that discussion, and we would like to hear more about where the group would like to focus in on for the next few months. With that, I'll turn it back to Co-Chair Frerichs for your discussions.
Great, thank you very much. So a couple things, just a couple points for some folks. Appreciate that. First of all, Jennifer, just wanted to, again, welcome Director Jennings. Appreciate seeing you here. Also, just wanted to let folks know, some folks have just been arriving and such. We definitely want to try to, so we'll now obviously have a discussion on this particular item and draft sort of charge of the working group, but want to also just let folks know that there are a number of folks who have to either leave at 2 or 2:30. So we're going to try and get as much done in the hour as possible, and also first hour as possible. And then also hoping to try and get a vote from the body before we lose a quorum of the body. So if you're getting close to the point where you have to leave, let me know, please, so we can try and just sort of see where we're at. So it would be close to 2 o'clock. So turning it back over to staff, over to members of the committee here, the working group. Anybody with sort of questions or comments that they want to kick off with?
I have a question. This is Sue Frost.
Sue, go right ahead.
In the last committee, we had a brief discussion regarding some of the work that's already being done in the local jurisdictions around equity and inclusion. And you mentioned that we can overlap or we can complement. And I can't remember what we came up with if we decided we were going. I think that the request was what is everyone else already doing? Is there a roadmap that's already imprinted in our zoning and in what we're doing in our local jurisdictions? And should we be aware of what that is so that we can then know how we can enhance or work with those jurisdictions to meet their individual goals? Thought I would throw it out just as a starting point.
I appreciate it. Thank you for that. We'll get staff's noting stuff down, so we'll be able to get some responses as well. Other folks with questions at all or comments as we kick things off here?
Just from the standpoint of, and maybe I'm missing it, but I'm looking for the timeline associated with the work that we're doing. And did I miss that? Is that somewhere that I'm not seeing it?
No, I don't think you missed it. I'm Co-Chair Frerichs. I saw you were about to jump in. I didn't mean to cut you off. I think at least initially, this working group would go through the end of this year under Co-Chair Frerichs and Samayoa. And then I think after that, it's more of an open question, though James and Co-Chair Frerichs, please feel free to jump in. But in terms of this working group, that would be it. The work plan that the consultant will be helping us with really is looking ahead to the next year and beyond.
Yeah,
So,
go ahead, Rick.
No, I guess just the way I'm familiar with working is normally you have a work plan and then you attach the times to it. So you're trying to work within a certain time to get that work plan done. And I guess I'm missing the roadmap that I'm looking for. And maybe that's because the consultant is the one that's responsible for doing that. So I'm trying to figure out how much should we be putting into this without having that work plan in front of us? Or are we developing the work plan?
In many ways, Director Jennings, we are looking for your input on the work plan, and we're looking to the consultant on the work plan. We're trying to be mindful of some of your feedback about approaching this with some humility, and we readily will tell you we don't have all the answers. Having said that, here's our understanding is Co-Chair Frerichs and Co-Chair Samayoa, as Jennifer just said, had asked for this group to convene and to come up with a couple of action items. That what can we do? It was very focused on work, on action, and to that regard, our intent is to staff you through the end of the calendar year so that by December, and really the end of this board cycle, there'd be a report back to the board. Here's what we've discovered. Here's where we think we're going long-term on this. Here's some things we should take on right away. How this working group and that work lives on after that, we know we won't solve these issues by any stretch in 4 months, but that is the first, if you will, if there is a roadmap, that's the first stopping point.
Okay.
I want to add one small thing, and I think we're gonna have the roadmap even built right now in my mind, because we have an opportunity in our next item to add to the funding framework, and that's as important as probably anything that we're gonna do in providing input or thoughts on our funding framework that's going to be funding in the next couple of years. So assuring that our voices are heard from this committee to the board on our thoughts on that. But I do think our goal, hopefully today with this first item, is to see is this framework, is this box that we're building big enough, small, too small, not flexible enough. So when I first read the group charge, I thought it was good. I thought it gave enough flexibility. And then the activities themselves, I thought, are what we're going to need to move forward. The way I think is like we need all the information, and I thought what Susan brought up, the idea of like what are some local efforts, or how are they going to merge with this work, and I think that's a lot of the data that we're going to need to be able to be effective as we move forward. So capturing that information, I think that this framework will allow us to go and capture what information is out there, what data can we gather, what are different municipalities or organizations are doing in our region in this arena that we can be able to work with and partner with. So those are my thoughts on our tasks right now for today would be to look at this framework. Is the box that we're building good enough for our work? It's going to allow us to actually have actionable items at the end of the first 3-4 months. And I think, the next item is going to help us move that roadway into actually having actual influence on our funding round. Rick, I don't know if that answered that was my thought when I heard you speak, Rick. Richard? Director Jennings?
Yes. I'm sorry. Yeah, I think it kind of gives me an idea of where we're going and what we're trying to do. So that helps clarify for me a little bit better than when I started this whole process, because I can see where we're scheduled to meet on a monthly basis. I'm not quite certain what the actions are within each one of those meetings. So,
yeah, I think that was important for us to bring a consultant in who's doing this type of work throughout the country, a national person who's doing this at the national level and working with different organizations or entities that can provide us with that guidance and provide staff with that guidance. And then we'll still end up making the recommendations to the full board. But I think the consultant is really going to be valuable in that sense to really clear things up for us so that we can make better decisions in consultation with the full board.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, can I weigh in on this too?
Go right ahead, please.
Yeah, I really want to double down on what Director Jennings suggested with respect to calendar, because I think calendar would also give us some discipline about the process. So first, I guess I should say first, I like the charge. I think it's solid. It reflects a lot of the input that we've provided so far. I think where I struggle with it some, and it's not the writing, it's also, you know, like kind of what we're doing here. And that I think a calendar might be helpful in is that it's all over the place, just like we are, which is, you know, so it's you know, there is, and I'm not sure it quite yet meets our board where the board is and where the individual members of the board are. And I think it's understood here with you know, work elements that are, you know, educating ourselves and our partners around the role of you know, the historical role about zoning and you know, some of the other issues that are the systemic parts of this effort. So there's a lot of education work to be done, but at the same time, it also has sort of an you know, for just a better shortcut, because I teach this too, is an urban millennial frame on the lens, which is we're already declaring that we're going to take an anti-racist approach, and we're using all of the most contemporary urban terms around this work before we've gone through that process. And I worry a bit that that if we chart out a process where we're going to try to engage and surface some of the issues that I know that staff has in mind and that we've talked about a little bit. And if we begin with a declaration of what's at the end of that, or halfway through that process of joint education and learning and surfacing and challenging and mirrors and all of that, that we won't get buy-in from our colleagues. Maybe just on this group we will, but we won't get buy-in if we start necessarily in that space. So I think I would, and especially it's in a purpose statement more, but pulling some of that out, I think sort of in an equivalent way, some of the policy conclusions that are already in here, I mean, whether displacement has a whole lot of relevance to gentrification, and gentrification has a lot of relevance to development. There's complicated issues, and they're complicated from a race-based perspective as well. And I worry that we are sort of projecting ahead what the policy outcomes or what our policy focuses are going to be, and we don't know those yet. So, I mean, you know, if I were just starting a calendar myself, I might spend the first couple of months in that process of learning and developing a shared vocabulary that is authentic to this organization first. And it may be some of these terms, but it may not be. And we have to build that sense of trust, some sense of safety, while also challenging at the same time for this to be productive. So I might focus more in that space at the beginning, with an eye towards, in the calendar, building towards some of these other elements along the way. So it's not that the activities are wrong necessarily. I think they're all correct, but I think they need to be scheduled out in order to be useful, and you need to have some theory. We need to have a theory about how they're going to relate, how we're going to build off them one at a time. The other piece I didn't see here is we're not the only ones doing this, and so you know, and it may be here, but really paying attention to some of the other MPOs and COGs and, you know, others around the country that are also grappling with these issues and thinking about them, and some of them have more background in this than we do. Others don't, but you know, to also learn from best practices in that space. And I think, as both Director Samayoa, Director Samayoa has emphasized, and Director Frost as well, in addition to supporting our members, also inventorying, surfacing, systematizing what they are already doing or are about to do over the next coming months in terms of our COG role would also be very helpful. So yeah, so I think a calendar would help to give us that discipline that we need in order to be really useful. But I keep looking at this not from the members of the work group perspective, but from members of the rest of the board, who you know, like, this issue requires uncomfortableness, but it's a managed uncomfortableness, because it can't be so uncomfortable that people who would otherwise volunteer to subject themselves to being part of it would walk away. We don't want that. We want them to say, okay, I can barely stand this. But it's so important that I'm sticking around for the next one. I'm coming back to the next one. We're going to punch through this together. We have to be able to tune this right in a way that's going to accomplish that.
Great.
So as a working group, just let me ask Chris really quickly, as a working group, if you look at the activities, if I was to choose what would go first, I was just to number things down. I mean, in my mind, the first one would be building data analysis. So you see it maybe listing them in a way that, that makes sense on how it would be supporting each other, and whether it's a pyramid or stack, or how things are going to be, what's the base, where do we start with the base, or is vocabulary or share vocabulary of, educating each other. And if it's the first 2 months, that's where we want to go. Like, what do you see as being the basis of this work if we just use the activities that were listed here?
Well, I like that one as an early one, both because it's important to be able to really paint the pictures and identify the gaps and the problems in some of the other areas. But also, be honest. I mean, to get to this issue, the board members we don't collect the data, so it's not threatening. So it's one of those areas where, like, okay, yes, I think we need to make better. We need better data-driven decision-making. SACOG is good at that. SACOG depends on good data. So, really figuring out a strategy. What is our plan then for doing bullet number 2 on the activities? That if that was a focus area for one of the first couple of meetings, it's tangible, it's directly relevant to SACOG, and it doesn't force people to start thinking about getting in corners and fighting over it, while still providing the seed corn that we're going to need for later on to really advance that work. We might simultaneously have maybe one of our luncheon workshops, and have the author of The Color of Law, or the PBS had a piece last week, or one of the news programs had a piece that specifically focused on Sacramento and the history of land use and its implications, and its relation to how the transportation system is based on the racial covenants from before, all those elements, not as a decision thing for us to vote on, but just, and that's a story that you can make interesting and engaging and fascinating without it feeling heavy. And in fact, people walk away from that like, that, I never knew that, now I can do something with that. So I think, a little mix of a little bit of both, of, kind of turning the mirror on ourselves to challenge and to learn, and also like taking some tangible steps on things like data would be great first couple of month activities that we could build on.
Yeah, thank you.
I would agree with that. I think the foundational side still needs to be laid. I mean, just looking at words equity and equality and bias, and so that we are sort of on the same page in terms of what those terms mean and what that means for the group as a whole, for the larger group, not just this work group. So I think it's important to have that and to have that discussion, as Christopher and Rick also laid out, so that we do have that foundational. I think if you start moving ahead too fast, you don't have that foundation where we're all kind of thinking, at least having a sense of what those terms and what we're looking to try to do. So I think it's important to have that initial group, whether it's, as Chris said, having someone come in and talk to us, having like implicit bias training, any of those things, just to kind of lay that foundation. I think it's important for us in order for us to actually have good work going forward here.
Great. No, thank you, Michael. Appreciate that, those sets of comments from you guys. Director Saylor wants to speak.
Yeah, I just think that the charge itself, as with any of our committee charges, it has enough information to guide the work of the working group. It doesn't get into the timeline or the specific tasks, and I think that's okay, because that is actually consistent with the way that we have our other committee charges laid out. I don't question any of the detailed steps that people might want to put forward, but I think the charge itself is sufficient and complete, and I don't differ with the language in the charge. And I think that all of the work that will follow it does follow. So I'm comfortable with the charge and moving ahead at some point soon.
Thanks, appreciate that. So I want to ask other directors that haven't had a chance to make comments or speak yet, if they would like to do so. So that's like Director Takar, Director Harris, Director Chenier. Any comments or questions at all and things you heard? And then also want to make sure that I didn't, to Director Frost's original question about sort of local government, other local government efforts or others, or maybe other, models that we've seen in terms of, what others are doing regionally or across the country. I would love a little bit of a response to that from staff. But if there are any directors yet who haven't spoken, again, Director Chenier, Director Harris, Director Takar, if you want to add anything, please, especially with regard to the sort of draft working group charge, love to hear that as well.
Thanks, Lucas. I think picking up a little bit on what Christopher was talking about, as I understand it, and tell me if I'm wrong here, but just the recognition that we're all starting at different places. And I think on this board, those could be vastly different places. So how do we get folks aligned? And, so again, I think spending some time on the foundation piece, trying to get everybody up to some kind of leveling off of understanding, but with the recognition that, again, we are not starting in the same place. We probably won't end up all in the same place as well. I mean, we have a lot of, everybody's got their own history here and their own story. So being respectful of that as we move forward and respectful of how others are thinking about it.
Thank you very much. Looks like Director Frost, maybe you wanted to say something again, or?
Yeah, I agree with what Director Chenier said. And I also wanted to, I guess, refer back to some comments that Christopher had made when we were first talking about forming this group, where he was wanting to identify, it had needed to relate to our core mission at SACOG and wanting to have it translate into, impacting that core mission, which is transportation. And so I think it's important, we almost have to explore, go through the foundational learning process and understand all of it before we can maybe see glimpses of ways that we can, translate that to our core mission, but always keeping that in mind is important, I think.
Great, appreciate that, thank you. So just will Directors Takar or Director Harris, if you have any questions or comments now, it'd be great to hear from you. And then I want to make sure that then we can sort of circle back towards next steps.
Yeah, real quick, I just want to offer my support of the draft. It looks really good, very thorough. I appreciate that. I also appreciate the conversation so far, and that we all desire to have the framework and the roadmap and the focus from the beginning, because so many of these meetings, types of things I've been in before, I think we probably all have, where we all agree on the issue of why we're here, but you spend so much time kicking that idea back and forth. But let's have some focus and let's make it happen. And so that's really encouraging, and that we stay focused again, like Sue just said, on our mission, because we could easily devolve into something that's a little grander that we all want. But let's remember why we're here by virtue of our positions on SACOG. So I appreciate that, and I'm in support of this draft. Thank you very much.
Great, appreciate that. Thank you. Yes.
Hi.
Hi, Sue. Go right ahead.
Hello, good afternoon. Yes, I am also very supportive of the draft. Very great work by Jennifer and the other staff members, and willing to go forward and help out however I can.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. So I just, I think I'll just try to do a little bit of a synopsis here. So, I mean, hearing from folks, obviously there are, generally speaking, folks pretty supportive of just the draft. There's obviously some, clear items that, have been raised about need for a calendar itself and, sort of action items. No question. I think that's very important, and how that would sort of, and also having some sort of like foundation, sort of common foundation for the group before, sort of proceeding with some of this work. I do think that some of that will also occur once we have the consultant on board. And, I think there'll be that's one of the key sort of, I'll get you 1 second, Jay. it seems like that'll be a pretty key sort of set of, next steps for the once the consultant is on board for us to sort of move forward with. I think also, I do think the comments around what other, let's not reinvent the wheel, right? There's others working on some of these things around in the region, but also in other industries and such, and then also other parts of other MPOs around the country. So sort of finding out what other templates exist out there would be helpful. But at some point would be, so if there are real adjustments that are needed with regard to the sort of working group charge, I'd love to hear sort of some very specifics from folks. If you say, hey, this is just, this is a non-starter, or this really needs to be, pulled out or and such, that would be appreciated. Otherwise, I think we'd love to see try to get to a place where we, are approving the draft charge here, so we can get that to the full board. But knowing full well that it's always the possibility of making adjustments to it. And that will of course happen as we move forward with some of our work. Jay, go right ahead.
Yeah, real quickly, and I don't want to contradict myself because I think these are not mutually exclusive here, but getting the foundation right and spending time on that doesn't mean that we shouldn't do things as we go forward and can agree on those. And the best example, I think, is the pilot, the $3 million pilot to build pipeline projects from communities that are most vulnerable. So things like that. So I don't want to say we shouldn't be doing anything. I don't want to spend a year figuring out the charge or whatever that is. We could do some things in that, but still doing the other work concurrently.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Other
Chair.
Go ahead.
Chair, I guess something's made me kind of feel a little, I think this mission and core mission of SACOG has come up now a couple times, and I guess for me is, I think when the mission was built, and I don't know when the mission and goals were built, or I don't know when the mission, I know we worked on goals the last few years for, we do have current goals that we're working on. But the mission portion of it, I guess for me is, I don't think we need to, I think that's something we might have to look at some point in time on when the mission was built and what the purpose of the mission and what type of point of views that the builders of that mission have for SACOG. So, because, I forgot who read it last time, but to me, it sounded, the focus was efficiency. And again, I think there's a conflict between efficiency and if we put lenses of equity and racial equity on documents or the policies or the direction that we take, I think those two things are very different and end up causing different effects or different impacts depending on how you use them. So I think eventually, I think we're going to have to reflect on our mission, because it might not be conducive to do some of the work that we want to do.
Mr. Chairman, this is Saylor. I'd like to comment on that.
Go right ahead.
Yeah, I'm glad that Director Samayoa brought that up, because there's nothing in conflict with our overall mission in the work that we're talking about doing here. In fact, we talk often about the prosperity plan for our region, and when we dig into that just a little bit, one of the aspects of it is inclusivity. When we talk about transportation, what we should be talking about is mobility for all people. That's really that's a necessary part of everything that we do. So I don't see this work as in conflict or in violation of any aspect of SACOG's purpose and mission. In fact, it's giving us an opportunity to focus on aspects of our role that we haven't paid enough attention to over the years. We did do work on this, and I'll be a broken record for just a half a second, when we had the Center for Regional Change work with us on the Opportunity Index, I think it was called, a few years back. So I think that we have precedent for digging into this. We haven't shown persistence in addressing the ways of addressing this set of topics, this aspect of our business. So I'm delighted that we're getting into this, and I thank directors Frerichs and Samayoa for getting us started here. But I don't want to let go of the idea that this is somehow in conflict with really what we should be doing, because it actually is a part and parcel of what we should be doing.
Appreciate that. Thank you. So other folks that have, very specific items that, in terms of the draft that they'd like to see again, either the items that should be added, items that should be taken out for now, or removed, I think we could, if there are folks who are willing to proceed, a motion would be, welcome as well. So pleasure of the group.
Move approval of the charge as stated and presented.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Motion by Saylor, second by Zaragoza. Are there additional questions, comments? I see Director Jennings has a comment or question.
So I'm in support of moving this forward. I just don't want to get locked in to exactly what's written on the issue, the recommendations, and other things that I'm looking in front of me. So I want to know from this group that as we bring in the consultant and we make sure that we're looking at a broader picture of some of the injustice that has taken place that has led us to inequity and injustice, I want to make sure that we can leave this broad enough that it just doesn't have to be racial injustice. It can be injustice, period. And so I guess, and that's coming from me. So I'm very concerned about racial injustice, but I'm also concerned with injustice, period, that leads to inequity. And when I look at this first issue, it's reducing disparities only due to racial injustice. That's that. So I just want to make sure that as we accept this, we can make this broader as we need to, or we're saying this is only going to be our charges as it talks about racial injustice. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, it does to me, certainly. And I think I know there's other folks that have hands raised as well too. So I don't know if they exactly want to respond to what you're saying or if they have other points. But so Director Cabaldon, I'll let you go next.
I'm still thinking about that. I agree. I definitely agree. But I had a separate comment, which is just that. Well, two of them. One is I think in the program of work we undersell our COG function. So we've talked before about one of the major drivers of this issue being on the agenda in our cities and in our counties has been policing, which that's not part of SACOG's MPO function. That's not, we don't report on that really in the SCS. But in terms of our best practice sharing, our data sharing, we've talked before about independent investigations being potentially a shared function to provide greater. I mean, there could potentially be a role in what SACOG does as just a group of local governments trying to get through the day, in addition to the role that we play in transportation, climate change, and housing policy. And so I think that doesn't need to become a huge thing here, but I do think we shouldn't lose that second. The second is I really, to the meet people where they are, comments that I made earlier, but also that Director Chenier and Director Zaragoza and others have said too. I would prefer to dial back the language of the charge to match the name of the group, to match what the board already charged us with being. For two reasons. One is that meeting folks where they are, and coming back with, okay, you said you wanted a race equity and inclusion working group, and we're coming back and we're changing that to be social and racial justice, anti-racism, and sort of other related terms. I feel like that's going to cause us to have a fight about the wrong things when we need to be building the foundation, as we said earlier, to actually make progress and build a consensus around action. So I would simplify and go to the language that we've already, that is our charge, that is our fundamental charge. how we were appointed in the first place, but also because we have a tendency to take these, the reason why these terms change every year, why last year, if you look on the web, last year, it was don't say equity anymore because equity is not inclusive. Inclusion is better than equity. But now, you know, even now we're saying no, equity is better than inclusion, but justice is better than equity. The reason these change every year is that every single year we all take them and over apply these terms to everything. So even this charge says, you know, we're going to look at our HR policies to make sure that they are advancing racial justice. That might be more than we should be promising from a set of HR policies. And so that there are points when diversity and equity are the right words. And I think sometimes we get ourselves in the sense like we have to keep bidding up the volume or the sharpness of the term. And while I don't have a problem doing, I represent an urban city, we do that anyway. But that's not the language of the whole 6-county region. And so I think to simplify, if you know, I think we'll get to a point. I hope we get to a point where the whole board is saying, yeah, I'm here because I want to do anti-racist policies. Yes, I want to get there. I don't think that's what the board told us, and I don't think we've done our homework yet to declare that on behalf of all of the board members at this stage. And we want to build the goodwill to get there, not be presumptuous about where they're at.
Thank you.
Well, I guess I would just ask, how would you operationalize your comment? Would you change the language in what sense? What would you do? Because it's a statement of a charge. So if there's something specific, I made a motion. I'd be happy to withdraw it if you've got language that you'd like to place in consideration.
Yeah, like I just said, I dialed it back. So where it says relating to race, equity, inclusion, social and racial justice, and anti-racism, I would simply repeat the terms of our charge: race, equity, and inclusion. Period. We don't need the rest. We haven't gone to those other. We haven't looked at those other issues really yet. Those levels of action are not on our radar at this point.
Okay, so the first paragraph, building equity, justice, and anti-racism, you would say race, equity, and inclusion.
Correct, and same thing in the first bullet.
All right. Michael, I would accept that as a friendly amendment to the charge.
As would I.
Appreciate that. And then so Rick, I would just wanted to respond to your, the item regarding, disparities. I mean, I agree. I personally think I agree with the, while this group seems to be clearly focused in part, race, equity, inclusion. I mean, I personally also have an agreement regarding around not, just solely having a focus disparities at large, right? Not just explicitly, racial disparities. So I get that might change the scope a bit, but I also think I agree why you're raising that issue. So, but folks that have questions or comments around that as well.
Frerichs, this is Sue Frost.
Yeah, go ahead.
It seems like I agree with staying with the original charge that we had, and including race, equity, and inclusion. And I wonder if it's a little bit premature to formalize a charge when we're hiring a consultant and there's a process that we're going to go through that could change the way we think about all of it. And I wonder if we can approve this as a draft charge.
I would second that, because what that does for me is it allows this to be broader and not so specific. And I think at this point in time, when I'm looking at the way this looks, if it's not due to racial injustice, then that means we don't look at it. Injustice anywhere is injustice everywhere, whether it's racial or not. And so I'm trying to not be so specific. I want at least some room for us to be able to get broader, and that's only going to happen when we bring in the consultant and we go through our foundational learning process.
I wonder if it's premature to formalize a working group charge.
So, I mean, first of all, thanks to both of you for the comments and such. I think I would say, I think we could certainly, I would like to see us move forward with at least the draft, right? Adoption of a draft. I mean, I think that, it's always has the ability to be adjusted and amended. This is not a set in stone type of situation, as with most of the things that we do, in the organization. It's not just set in stone and put it on the shelf and that's it. This is going to be a continue to be an evolving, process, of course. But I think it's important for us to be able to take, there's been some this directions coming out of the June board meeting. Now the second meeting of this body, the first meeting clearly was not long enough, we get that, to sort of go through everything sort of adequately. But I think that, for us to at least have this body make at least a draft charter in charge, whatever, to take to the full board so the board sees the work that's being done, I think is pretty important for us to consider doing that. Again, I think there's going to be adjustments to it, no question, over time. I would love to hear, if there's other sort of final sorts of sets of comments on this. We've got, a motion and a second, and there was a friendly amendment to sort of focus a little bit more specifically. But if there are additional questions or comments, please let's have those now on the motion. James, go ahead.
Yeah, Kurt, just to maybe try to put everybody a bit more at ease. As you know, every committee of the board has a charge every year. You update them. You update them every year. There's no reason in some ways you couldn't adopt the charge today, work on it with the friendly amendment, and honestly have the work of the consultant help us. If this group is here, work on it more. I say as your staff, I think it's important to have some direction, to have some wraparound. This is why we're here, and we can come back and change that at any time.
That's all I'm asking for.
Appreciate it. Yeah.
Can I ask, because the consultant's been mentioned a few times, and I think the charge is partly important to set the consultant up right as well. To have some minimal amount of clarity and structure about what it is that we're doing. But it sounded like you're sole sourcing a consultant contract, then you'll come back and you'll let us know who it is, or is there a process that's under?
Sure. Certainly, staff can talk about it a little bit too. But so yeah, there was an RFP issued. There were approximately 15 or so respondents in that range, maybe 12 to 15, somewhere in that range. Respondents, interview process, narrowed down to a smaller subset interview process that took place with including a variety of key staff, but also the vice chair of the board and myself, co-chairs of this body, participated in interviews. I don't know if staff has additional comments or.
I can just briefly cover it. So we've selected the McKenzie Mack Group, which is based in Chicago. They were one of 2 finalists. They've done some work with local governments, more so around the Chicago area, but definitely familiar with this type of work. And it's a team consultant approach, including one former elected official from that area as well. So a little bit of perspective from where you're coming at. And they are listening in today, but we didn't want to put them on the spot. We just gave them the award announcement on Friday. But it's within the executive director's signing authority of the contract.
Thanks.
Great. Any additional either questions or comments right now? Just again, motion on the floor, seconded with a friendly amendment. Again, it just puts the draft in place. I think it's good to be able to take to the full board, sort of give folks an update of where we're going, and then of course with acknowledgement that it's subject to evolving and additional changes. Not seeing any other hands raised. Mr. Co-Chair, I do see him. Yes, go right ahead.
Sorry, I really appreciate the openness of the discussion, because I really think that the not necessarily the broader we leave it, but assuring that we include all inequalities is important, especially for our rural areas and some of our poorer areas in our communities. it's really going to be significant to be able to get everyone on the same page to say this is really important, and the more work we do towards solving inequalities of all types, it's really going to make our region stronger. So thank you. I think going back to that, I just want to say how much I agree, just because we do have inequalities throughout our region, and they don't necessarily have to be racial. They're just inequalities that have caused a lot of economic and social issues in our area.
No, thank you. Appreciate that very much. Good synopsis. So if there aren't any further questions or comments on the motion, we'll call for a vote, please. Whoever's going to do that.
Are we approving it as a draft or as a, I just wanted to make sure I understood it.
Yeah, that's my understanding. I mean, we should seek that clarity from the motion maker and the seconder, but yes, that was.
Well, actually, I thought that Mr. Corless's comments were helpful, because we're approving it as this is our charge that we're recommending to the board, but any charge can be amended. We anticipate that this one will evolve. I would prefer not to adopt it as a draft. If we wanted to say something, to clarify that we all understand it can evolve and change as the work unfolds. So I wouldn't characterize it as a draft, but as the charge of the work group that we recommend to the board.
And I don't know if part of the second motion, including just to reduce to what the what Cabaldon has said about not adding additional things after inclusion, and that those things, and I think you agreed to them, that we could remove the social and racial justice and anti-racism in both the first paragraph and then the first sentence, I think, of activity.
That was added into the motion as a friendly amendment. Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to clarify what we were voting on. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you. Any other further questions, comments on the underlying motion? Moved and seconded. Okay, so please, we could please have the roll called. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Directors Cabaldon?
Aye.
Frost?
Aye.
Gallardo is absent. Harris?
Aye, thank you.
Joyner is absent. And Jennings?
Aye.
Lozano is absent. Saragosa?
Aye.
Saylor?
Aye.
Chenier?
Aye.
Spokley is absent. And then co-chair Samayoa?
Aye.
Wrong number.
Aye.
Thank you. And then co-chair Frerichs?
Aye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate that. So that is, we have definitely, that motion passes. Thanks very much, everybody, for the discussion there. Now, just moving on to the agenda item number 2, which is.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, go right ahead.
We did not hear public comment on the first item, so I'm not sure if you want to move on before you move on.
Yes, that would be great. Thank you. My apologies. So are there anyone, members of the public, who are interested in providing comment on the item 1?
Currently, we do not have any public members that are indicating they would like to make a comment.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Again, my apologies for that. So moving along to item 2, prepared by, so Jennifer, do you want to sort of kick this off? Or I know I see Garrett out there too, but I'm not sure who's going to do that. And then my apologies again, I have to leave it in a few minutes for another work commitment, and the co-chair is going to lead the rest of the meeting.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, I'm going to let Garrett start us off talking about the framework and the committees that have happened since you all have met, and then he'll hand it over to me and I'll kick you off for a continuation of your discussion at the last meeting. So go ahead.
And we don't need action on this matter, correct? You just need input so we can provide that to our transportation committee or the full board, or you need action on our feedback?
It won't be an action. I think what we're proposing is that we'll take any recommendations today, summarize those, and vet them through through you and co-chair Frerichs, and then we would present those at the full board meeting because there's not a clear action to ask of you today. So we'll take what we hear and try to form that into something for the full board consideration on the 20th.
Yeah, the Transportation Committee has already taken up the item and unanimously recommended it to the full board. So this would come in addition to the recommendation from that committee.
Okay.
Great.
Go
Well, thanks. Thank you, co-chair. Just as Jim mentioned, a brief tee up of just connecting the dots. And in doing so, we're very appreciative of the comment and conversation this working group just had about the need for a calendar and action plan, but also the need for tangible actions and key parts of the work program. So the funding round, of course, is both timely and tangible. And the co-chairs, after announcing the working group, also flagged the funding round framework as one of the key items that the working group would take up immediately. And so we very much recognize that the shortened timeline on this project. But of course, through the last Thursday and this morning on Monday, all three of the SACOG board committees have heard the staff recommendation for the funding round framework, and it will be in front of the full board on August 20th. As Director Cabaldon mentioned, it did come through the Transportation Committee with its recommendation. We tried to emphasize in that staff presentation to the various committees that we emphasize a lot of the structural elements of the framework. We also emphasize that the equity considerations are very much on a parallel track, and that we had a very brief conversation with this working group in its initial meeting, and are coming back today to think through what are the elements, the ideas we've had to date, and direction on what are other things we could consider to further bring equity considerations to the funding round. So staff presentations themselves just try to emphasize that conversation is happening today at this working group. So just to bring it back to that conversation, again, we recognize we came forward in the first meeting of this working group with some ideas. We heard some good direction about maybe what works and what doesn't work as well. And we've been trying to incorporate those into the framework. And so I'll turn that back over to Jen to sort of tee up the continuation of that conversation.
Thanks, Garrett. Yeah, as Garrett mentioned, at our last meeting, your last working group meeting, it was a bit short and we didn't get a chance to hear from everybody. So we wanted to give the time and space to continue that discussion today and see if there are any additional recommendations for furthering equity in the funding round that this group might want to bring forward to the full board on August 20th. Building from the last conversation we had, we heard, I think, support for the new disadvantaged community pipeline program and building those projects. I think we heard some interest for prioritizing, perhaps by starting by adding equity in as one of the program goals. And we definitely heard, we wanted, whatever it is we do, we want to be able to make sure it's something that we can do well and that it has an impact. We also heard concerns about going too far without all of the data. So just based on that discussion and respectful that you're about to have a continued discussion on that, staff is suggesting maybe consider two parts to the discussion. And the first could be, what is it? How would we want to shape or offer amendments to the funding round framework as it is now? Or support the funding round framework as it is now, such as really focus in on that disadvantaged community pipeline program and ensuring we do it well, having the goal in there so that we are signaling to the future funding rounds that this is something of importance. And then the second part might be, what do we do in between rounds? Since there is an action coming up on this funding round quickly, what is it we could do in between prior to the next funding round in 2022, such as building those data and those metrics, analyzing the program or evaluating the program as a whole and historically to see what we learn and what we can move forward in 2022. So that's a suggestion, but definitely this is your conversation to have. And then, as I mentioned, it's not an action, but staff will summarize any recommendations we hear today, vet those through the co-chairs, and then they would be presented at the full board meeting on August 20th. So I'll hand it back to you, Co-Chair Samayoa, for your guys' discussion. Garrett and I can answer any questions.
Perfect. I'm using my iPhone, so I can't, well, I guess I can tell if people are raising their hands, so I'll just go through this here, and please, anyone who wants to start the discussion about the type of input that we want to continue providing the full board on the funding framework. So I don't see anyone raising their hand, so I'll call on Sean Harris. Sean, you're there since you're my buddy.
You know, I heard my name, Ricky, but I was shooing my dog out of the room. So you're talking about, yeah. You know, we had a good discussion before about the funding round. I really nothing more to add. We had a very good discussion. I think staff put clearly a lot of effort into the preparations. The people were very good at articulating their various opinions. I am in favor of what was presented, and I think it's going to go well if we put through. I think some of the concerns that we had, one initially I had a good conversation with James, as we're able to present our priorities, our list of projects that we're sponsoring in order of priority, but how would that translate into helping a certain our number one versus perhaps the criteria that's presented or considered might prefer our fourth priority. How would that going to be an advantage to us to simply communicate that? And so we had a good conversation about that. But I appreciate the fact that it was provided an opportunity for us to relay that information and what our preferences are. And and you know, my background, I call it a pretrial conference. I'm not even sure what we're using for, but the meeting with staff ahead of time. I think that is going to be very helpful because you can get the backstory on a one-on-one conversation to help clarify certain things, and versus just looking at a piece of paper on an application. So I appreciate that.
Thank you, Mayor.
Ricky, this is Don. I'd like to make a comment.
Yes, sir.
So some of this is in the swim of things. When is the right time to do something? And often it's the right time is now. I'm not sure if that's the case here, but here's the thing. If we don't address equity in our program goals, then I feel like we're leaving something off the table. And I think it's important for us to do it. I think it's important for the funding round, the packages that we send out to our jurisdictions, that we ask them to identify if their project is going to benefit disadvantaged communities. It's one thing to have a sort of a standalone additional piece that is something we can point to and say, look, we're handling it, it's over here. But if all of our $190 million program is going out irregardless of equity and inclusion and supporting the needs of disadvantaged communities, I would feel I think that we would be falling short. So I like the 4 bullet points that are included here, that the desire to focus on most impactful changes. Yeah, I think we should be doing that. And certainly we should support the disadvantaged communities pipeline project. But the final 2 bullets, I would like to have us do something with those 2 bullets this year. And it doesn't mean that we finish it. It doesn't mean that we scrap everything else. It simply means I'm simply interested in being able to build in more into the fabric or into the bricks of our structure here, this focus rather. And again, we may not be ready, but I certainly would like us to get started.
Since the funding program, I guess I want to maybe get a bit clearance from staff. When they say program goals, are they specifically talking our funding program, our funding program, or is this kind of are we talking we're going to go into our working 5-year, 20-year plan for MTP? Or are we talking about this specific funding program that we need to be more explicit? And then what would that look like? And maybe that's a question to staff. And when you wrote this.
Sure, I'll start, and Jen, feel free to jump in. So our long-range plan, the MTP-SCS, already has an explicit goal around equity and inclusion. And then what we're talking about in this item is to have that sort of analog sort of goal within the funding round itself. And it's a bit more sort of technical in that the funding round is sort of the umbrella, and then there are individual programs within the funding round that sort of constitute that overall funding round. And so I think the idea is within each of those individual programs, how do they consider equity? And just to build off of Director Saylor's point, it's a quick turnaround between that first working group, this working group's first session, and the mail out for the committee items. But we have updated the program goals for the regional program, the largest program. That's attachment D in the staff item that went through the committee cycle, and it does include equity as part of the goal. So I just wanted to clarify that that was actually one of the key tangible things. And again, it was a quick turnaround that we heard from the first working groups meeting that we've already incorporated. The second is based on that direction and then the own recommendation of our internal staff, the naming of the Disadvantaged Communities Pipeline Program. We removed the term pilot to emphasize just how important we feel like this program is moving forward. So those are two tangible things we've made based on the direction of this working group to date.
And just to kind of continue on Director Saylor's thought of the data tool, is that going to be a separate source of funding to fund this? Is it going to be allocated specifically for this work? Or is it going to be part of your overall like data gathering analysis systems that you have?
So again, I'll start just from the funding round perspective, but I think it then will catapult to a larger conversation because we recognize that this is a longer term need. From the funding rounds perspective, we do have a data sort of tool that we've built over several years. It does include an equity consideration. So for example, when we first unveiled the tool in 2018, it gave you some information about if that project landed within a disadvantaged community or not. But we very much recognize that just geographic proximity isn't translates into necessarily benefits. So in this round in 2020, we've built out the tool to also include information on if the project provides access to disadvantaged residents to key things like jobs or services. So there's a data component that's part of the funding round, that's part of that tool. But I think what we're recognizing in this broader working group charge is we want to do more moving forward. I think that's a key bucket of the tasks for this working group. But given the data, that probably will be lagging, and it'll be more of a 2022 sort of application in the round. So there are things that we have incorporated on the data side within this funding round, but there's also more things we're going to be doing moving forward.
Director Saylor, so I think we got the staff has already seemed to work already explicit in our program goals.
Yep.
So that's something we can check off of our to-do. So that's a good thing. And then the pipeline project has also been secure. As long as if it continues moving forward and gets approved by the board, then we'll have that in place. So we can say we've done two things already. Thank you. Any other comments on what's been talked about? I can't see hands, so just speak up, please.
This is Sue Frost, and I guess, are we then talking about just including, equity in the funding round, but not a specific program, not any new specific programs, but just making sure we're including our goals and our missions in this funding round, since they've already, the committee's voted on it. Are you talking about making adjustments to the funding round that's already been put forward from the Transportation Committee?
And staff could correct me, but I believe that from the Transportation Committee, we already had explicit items on equity on each of the programs from our funding round, and that it also included a community pipeline project program as part of our funding round as one of the programs. So those two things.
This doesn't.
Those two things already moved forward from the Transportation Committee based on the input that staff received during our last meeting.
So it doesn't change what they have already voted on?
Unless you want to go further, or we want to go further and provide additional input from that.
I think it's kind of premature to, I think to include our mission in the funding round so that it's clear that it's our mission moving forward, but to have specific, I think it's kind of hard to have specific programs when we haven't even done our research yet. We don't even have, the consultant hasn't even brought any information back yet. So it seems premature. Those are my comments.
Thank you. Staff, can you maybe provide a description of the Community Pipeline Project program?
Sure. So this is part of the framework that the Transportation Committee has recommended. It definitely has been infused with the thinking of this working group. It would be, right now, the draft budget is for $3 million for non-competitive funding for cities and counties in the four county region to help lead a program of community-supported projects. So getting that next iteration of a pipeline of projects, making sure those have community supports with clear benefits for disadvantaged communities. So it is part of the framework that the Transportation Committee has already recommended. This can go to the full board next Thursday.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions?
I guess the point I would just add, I didn't mean to interrupt, Co-Chair, is that the guidelines of that program are still being under development, and we have great confidence in pairing with our own staff, especially those in our own internal working group on equity, of putting forward guidelines that sort of reflect the spirit of this program about clear benefits for disadvantaged communities and community support. But if that's an area of interest for this working group, that very much is a live sort of area of activity of developing the guidelines for those programs. So we'll be coming back next month in September with more details on that, but we haven't yet made that next step of sort of translating the concept, which we believe is really important, into the guidelines themselves.
Thank you.
Thank you. Again, I'm in an iPhone. I can't see hands up, so please just speak up. Or I'm going to call people out again. Mayor Harris, what do you think?
I'm sorry, I'm on the phone, man. Don't do that to me anymore.
Just messing. Okay, I'm going to pick on folks, unless we want to just any further input on the from this group to the transportation funding round.
Silence is assent.
Yeah, I think so, Director Saylor. Well, not seeing hands up. Any other questions from staff or anything else you guys want us to ask us to provide you input on?
No, I just thank you for your time and opportunity to present today. Maybe just to close out what the board is going to be acting on the 20th is the top level framework. And we've been talking through our ideas within specific programs about how to incorporate equity. And I think then when we come back in September, it might be a bit more tangible about how we connect the dots. So there'll also be the opportunity both through the September committee cycle they all sit on, and then the September iteration of this working group, sort of connect the dots and see some of the, we're throwing a lot of information at you about specific programs, how those individual ideas nest together in the overarching round.
Well, thank you. There's no other comments. We can adjourn a lot earlier. Any comments from the public on this item?
Currently, there are no public comments.
Okay. Well, thank you again for the time. I think we've actually added value to our board and SACOG and the things that we're doing, and just even going over today on the influence that we had on the funding round, I think was important work already. So, and as we get the calendar and timelines and tasks, and as we work with our consultant, I think we'll have additional things to kind of work through. I'm also really interested in getting to the kind of a base kind of a share values and vocabulary that we can all use and feel good about moving forward, and kind of a educational process that not only this committee will go through, but also will go to the full board. And in my mind, it should also find a way that we can get it to our local staffs and other partners in the community. So I think that's going to be great work as we move forward to kind of have the share set of values for our entire COG. So if there's no further comments, I'll adjourn this meeting.
I just want to thank Directors Jennings and Takar for getting the memo on color coordination today.
Bye, everyone. Thank you, Ricky.
Thank you. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.